Hey, we're in Miami, Florida, and today you guys are going to be able to see Steve Austin. He's one of our partners with Revitalization Unlimited, and we are on a walking tour to showcase some of his properties in this beautiful city of Miami. What they do is they buy historical real estate and they leverage the historical tax credit to help you with your tax mitigation strategies. So come on and follow me today. Steve, what are we doing today with this group?
We are touring some historic buildings in downtown Miami.
All right. So why is it important for your tax mitigation purposes? Share with us a little bit more about the history.
Yeah, so it's the preservation of the historic buildings. When you preserve them, you're going to get a charitable deduction for the lost development rights that you've stripped away. Okay. So we go through the whole process of determining what you can legally build and what you can do with the buildings, and ultimately then get that designed by architects and engineering firms so that we can get it valued.
Where are we about to step into?
We're about to step into the Courthouse East building, which was built in the early 1900s. It's one of the Miami Art Deco buildings, and it was used as the county clerk's office and traffic court primarily. And we're actually planning to convert this old historic building into a modern data center.
Okay. All right, guys, we'll follow along and we'll head on into the building now.
So this floor will have your backup generators. There'll be three massive 3.3 megawatt generators in this space going right down here. They'll build out diesel control rooms over here. So fire safe rooms that'll have 7,500 gallon tanks of diesel for backup fuel. And then all the network gear and everything else, right? That'll all be down here on the ground floor. Directly above me is going to be the vault room where FP&L will bring in all of their transformers and switch gear. I've always had a love for historic architecture. It started with my first home in New Jersey, which was 1920s colonial. And I've just always really appreciated the architecture styles. And when I got to marry my love of real estate and historic buildings with, an investment fund that allows us to leverage federal, state, and local tax incentives to help improve economics for our investors, I just was like in love with the idea that I could kind of marry up those things that I've loved for most of my life. And that I even found a way to integrate, our love of, industrial manufacturing into the fund.
Yep.
And, everything we do is about kind of legacy and preservation and history, right? Whether it's, buying legacy businesses that, somebody started 30 years ago and they're trying to keep their, workers from losing their jobs, and they're just kind of holding on to that company into retirement and saving that, American knowledge and know-how, right? Or preserving these historically significant buildings.
What is Revitalization Unlimited, and what was one of the biggest inspirations to you starting this fund as well as making acquisitions? Because that's what we talk about here on the show, is just continually making acquisitions, and then as well helping people understand the creative aspect of that as well.
Really what inspired this company was charting a new path. I was a financial advisor. I was doing a lot of wealth management for high net worth individuals. At the time, I was also doing a fair amount of conservation easements, which is a similar strategy in terms of the tax treatment of those things. But as an advisor, I was always drawn more towards how do I help my clients build more wealth, and how do I help them grow their businesses and their net worth. And when I was presented with, historic preservation, which at the time I hadn't come across yet, the light bulb just kind of went off for me. And I said, wow, I can't understand why everybody's doing this thing over here, and there's like nobody doing this over here, where you can go take these, beautiful historic buildings and you can, use these various tax incentives to kind of breathe new life into them. Mm-hmm. And so that's where the creativity comes in, right? Is one of the things that we have to do is we got to take every one of these properties and we have to envision what it could become, right? What does the current zoning law allow us to do with that property? Can we tear it down? Can I put up an 80-story tower like I can here in Miami, or in Kansas City, maybe it's a 40-story tower? And then what what can go inside that tower, what's the best use of that building to drive the best economic outcome. And then often, sometimes that redevelopment isn't in the public's best interest, right? Because you got a beautiful old historic building that's very significant to the local community. For example, the World Precious Metals building here in Miami. It's been a part of the jewelry district now for the better part of 5 decades. So that building being torn down would be a big detriment to
the community as a whole.
Yeah, the history of the jewelry district in Miami. I don't know that there's anything more poetic in real estate than preserving a beautiful old historic building that might not have the best use any longer as an office building, right? And being able to convert that to something as modern and high tech as a data center.
Share with us more about Miami as a strategic location for the expansion of RU.
I think it comes down to a few different things, but, I think what drew me to Miami in the first place was just, it's a very vibrant city. It's very, community oriented. Miami has a reputation of being the party city at times, but, it's really one of the smallest big cities that I know of in the country. And there's such great neighborhoods and just community life here in a lot of different ways. And that's kind of what drew me here personally.
I want to pause just for a second. Hey, I want you to come on over here. Check this out. Look at where we're at. Yeah. This is downtown. How many buildings right now are under construction? Do you know?
I don't know the exact number, but somebody's told me the stat is something to the tune of there are more than 30 different cranes operating building towers here in Miami-Dade County alone. One of the key things we look for is upward development potential, right? Meaning, what can I do with these historic buildings once I buy them? Can I tear them down and put up a tower? And ultimately, if you look all around us here, you'll see that, Miami is a city that has a lot of modern architecture. But you go a couple of blocks over where we were doing our walking tour, and, you're going to find that, you have some of the most beautiful old historic buildings, similar. We took, our guests the other day into the Ingram building, right? And, everybody was just blown away by how well maintained and preserved that historic building is. And, we were looking up at the ceilings and all the ornate architecture. Yeah.
I mean, the views that we've had, and then as well the buildings. But I think what's going to be cool is when you completely renovate those into cash flowing assets.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that not a lot of people are looking at when you can acquire historical real estate assets. So you have the tax credit, and then you also have, for example, you're converting one of these buildings into a data center.
Yeah.
So share with us a little bit more about the thought process behind the data center development.
Well, again, our job is to maximize the returns for our investors. And right now, there's nothing that's more profitable in real estate than, as a landlord, than building a data center. And so it kind of shifts the paradigm of real estate a little bit, in the sense that traditionally in real estate, you're renting things on a square foot basis and you're buying things on a square foot basis. And when you get into data centers, there's still an element that, you're somewhat restricted by your raw footage, but it really comes also down to power density, right? And so I could have 2 identical structures on opposite sides of the street. And if one of them has 50 megawatts and one of them has 25 megawatts of power, well, the one with 50 megawatts of power is going to make double the income and be worth double the money, to me as a landlord, right? So it kind of totally upends the traditional real estate lens.
Yeah, well, and that's one thing I noticed. You're leveraging an asset, but also you're preserving a community.
Yeah.
And I think that's everything that you stand for. That's what the company stands for. You're preserving legacies, you're preserving buildings, you're continuing to work with the community at large, which is another thing that we talked about, even looking at the Miami-Dade courthouse, which is an incredible asset that could be completely reverted or, obviously part of the portfolio.
Yeah, we're definitely looking at that. We're eager to see where we can go with that particular project and what we can do to allow that to continue to serve the local community.
Share with us a little bit deeper though, as how this investment can also help with the tax mitigation, as well as maybe high income earners that may be making additional income, and then how they can leverage your actual opportunity.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And what I like to start with is just kind of helping people understand what can happen, right? And the what for an investor is that you're allowed to take a 50% reduction. The maximum charitable deduction you can get in this form, which is considered a non-cash charitable deduction, right? Because you're donating real property, you're not donating cash, right? So that's why it's called a non-cash. And under that law, you're allowed to offset 50% of your household income, right? So if you got a husband and wife that happen to make $1 million a year, it doesn't matter if you have a business owner or a W-2 employee, you're able to cut your income in half through these types of deductions, right? That's the tangible piece that the investors are going to get. The rest of it is when you get into the renovation tax credits, which are called historic tax credits, then there's a nuance that we have to look at of, do we hold on to those credits, or do we go to the bank and say, hey, you're doing the construction loan, we want to sell you these credits, and they take them at a discount, meaning maybe we get 80 cents on the dollar, but now our investors don't have to meet all the criteria to be able to use those credits over the next 5 years. That money comes in from the bank as part of the construction package, right? And that allows us to realize the turnaround on that money to our investors a lot faster.
I guess a lot of our investors are probably overexposed to tech stocks like most people today, and they don't have enough diversification into real estate.
Yep.
So the fact that we can offer some very attractive tax benefits, but more importantly, a strong real estate play, I think is really good for somebody's overall portfolio.
All right, we've talked about the tax credit. We've talked about what you want to do with these buildings. We've walked through them. But now share with me your personal agenda and as well how you got started in this business.
Yeah, so I was doing a lot of conservation easements, which is a very similar part of the tax code, similar strategy. You're preserving farmland and ranch land.
Yep.
And somebody presented me with, an offering memorandum for another deal that was doing historic preservation, and just wanted my opinion on it. And after kind of digging in and vetting the deal a little bit, I looked at it, and the light bulb kind of went off in my head that, if I can preserve a historic building and still get a nice, not as aggressive of a tax benefit as conservation easement was,
yep,
but something a little more conservative, but now I own an actual income producing piece of real estate. To me, that was just fundamentally about wealth creation for our investors, right? Is instead of just doing something where, my investment is gone and I got a lot of tax benefit, but I have no real economic interest in the fund, in the property, here our investors own these buildings. They own the income streams from the buildings. And eventually we're going to sell and liquidate these buildings, and the investors are going to get their money back. And so even without the tax benefits, people invest in real estate funds every day. And, as an advisor, my clients are always asking me to vet different real estate funds for them and show them different ways to invest into real estate. So this was really more or less just an extension of, hey, how do I marry up my experience in real estate and marry that with, my love of historic buildings and preservation. And that's kind of how it all came together.
I just want to say thank you for taking us on this tour. You showed us around, you showed us the buildings, you've shared with us a little bit more about and behind the scenes for Revitalization Unlimited, the tax strategy, the investors, and everything. But I've got to ask you though, what does the future hold? And what are you seeing in your current industry?
Well, I certainly don't have a crystal ball as much as I'd like to, but I think what the future holds is a lot of growth. Regardless of what happens with the tax laws and which branch of government is moving in which direction, we really don't pay too much attention to that. We're really focused on continuing to grow, and that means meeting more, partners that, whether it's CPAs, financial advisors, broker dealers, as well as, just continuing to identify, underwrite, and acquire high quality real estate deals. Mm-hmm. So that's our focus at Revitalization Unlimited, as well as doing the same thing when it comes to American manufacturing. And regardless of, what the tools are at our disposal, that's what the future holds for Revitalization Unlimited.
Well, then also just what you're doing for the overall community that you serve. I think that's, again, a noble endeavor, both from the acquisition, but also just transforming the buildings and helping to preserve those. So again, I just want to say thank you so much, guys, for tuning in with the AHQ docu-series around acquiring entrepreneurs just like Steve here. And we cannot wait to shoot more just like this for you in the future. If you liked it, feel free to subscribe as well as to comment below. And we look forward to making more for you in the future.